This report contains graphic descriptions of animal and possible human experimentation. If this is a topic you wish to avoid, do not proceed. This is a highly classified document, one that the powers that be would prefer remain buried forever. And yet somehow it found its way to me. I can't say how. My job is to tell you what's in the file. Whether you believe it or not is your own business. In the early 60s, Project Sign was initiated. Its purpose was to study backwards flying disks. One of the major discoveries made during this project was that the disk objects were possibly of extraterrestrial origin. The conclusions of Project Sign were submitted to Project Grudge. But according to former Project Grudge director Major Jesse Marcel, his superiors pressured him to alter his report. What was originally labeled as a metallic disk about 47 feet in diameter, a metallic sphere within the disk, and an outer edge which appeared to be a rubber-like material, was changed to clusters of metallic scrap, resembling tinfoil brightly polished and punched with numerous small holes. Project Blue Book was then activated to continue studies. However, the Air Force stated that there was no scientific evidence that disks were extraterrestrial in origin. In 1966, a man named Philip J. Corso was hired to evaluate documents from Project Blue Book. Corso believed the government was hiding the truth about UFOs, and after studying over 2,000 cases, he came to the conclusion that a large percentage of them could be substantiated. He also claimed that the Air Force allowed him to examine pieces from recovered disks, including parts of a vehicle that had crashed near Mexico City in 1969. The material was unlike anything he had ever seen before. It was not a metal. It did not conduct electricity like metals. It did not react to acids like metals. It was very lightweight. It was obviously an advanced material. After that, Corso was ordered to turn over all his notes and documents to the CIA. Corso knew something big was going on behind closed doors. Something important had crashed in Roswell, and the military had retrieved it. He learned later that the recovered material was taken to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Corso managed to talk to a scientist at Wright-Patterson who told him the material was definitely not of this Earth. Several hours later, two men in dark suits showed up at Corso's hotel room to retrieve his notes. They also informed him that he was not to speak of what he had seen or learned to anyone. When Corso refused to sign a statement saying he would not discuss UFOs anymore, he was fired. One day he got a call from someone at the Air Force who asked him how much money would it take for him to keep quiet. Corso said, "How much do you think it would take?" An alleged former intelligence operative named Bob Cooper told writer Brad Olson about two crashed saucers. One was in 1947 and the other in 1964. Both were located in the New Mexico desert. The second one was covered up by the military as a nuclear accident. The debris from the second crash was taken to a hangar where a small group of people worked around the clock. No records of any kind were kept. The debris was turned into a pulp-like substance, allegedly to prevent anyone from discovering any trace of the material. Whatever the material was, it didn't conduct heat. It just sat there and glowed red hot. No one seemed to know what it was. There were rumors of 3 dead bodies, but they were kept secret. Cooper believes the bodies were taken to a private facility on the East Coast. Another source claimed that 4 bodies were recovered in the 1940s and were taken to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base for examination. Then they disappeared. Sources also claim that the U.S. military owns between 8 to 12 saucers and has recovered between 20 to 30 bodies of visitors. The current U.S. policy on UFOs is to assume every unidentified object in the sky is a Soviet spy satellite. This policy has been in effect since the mid-1970s. If a radar contact remains unidentified after primary and secondary identification methods fail, the assumption is that it is a Soviet spy satellite. The Joint Chiefs of Staff adopted this policy even though there was no hard evidence that any unidentified aerial phenomenon was a Soviet spy satellite. The first documented example of the U.S. government attempting to explain away UFO sightings as Soviet spy satellites occurred in August of 1967, when two Canadian Air Defense Command posts detected anomalous aerial vehicles over the Northwest Territories. The U.S. Secretary of Defense, Captain H.C. Decker, publicly announced that the vehicles were most likely Soviet M-22 spy satellites. In reality, they were MC-130E combat galaxies conducting low-altitude surveillance missions. Another example occurred in January of 1977 when two Air Force generals used the Soviet Union's Cosmos 954 satellite as a cover story to explain away a daytime saucer-shaped object spotted over Belgium. In 1978, U.S. officials used the launch of the Soviet Union's Cosmos 1514 satellite as a cover story to explain away an unidentified radar contact over Washington state. In February of 1980, the American Secretary of Defense attributed a UFO sighting over the state of Maine to a Soviet satellite. The same thing happened again in March of 1980, when an unknown radar contact over Arizona was explained away as a Soviet satellite. U.S. Air Force Manual 1141-01-251 outlines the correct method of reporting unidentified flying objects. A UFO is defined as any aerial object that is not identified immediately as friendly or as an aircraft. If a pilot sees a UFO, he is to use all available means to visually identify the object. If that fails, the pilot is to make 2 passes at high speed and gain a radar lock. If that fails, the pilot is to attempt to intercept and make a physical identification of the object. If that fails, the pilot is to return to base without making any further attempts to identify the object. On May 1965, at Edwards Air Force Base, Major General Vladimir Kovalyonok of the Soviet Air Forces sat down with U.S. officers for a discussion on UFOs. Kovalyonok confirmed that the Soviet Union had studied the UFO question extensively since 1961. He revealed that the Soviets had examined 15 meteors that were undoubtedly of extraterrestrial origin. Kovalyonok said that the Soviet Union did not have a complete explanation for the UFO phenomenon, but that the existing data suggested that UFOs are not weapons and not spaceships. He expressed doubt that there was life on other planets, and felt that the possibility of extraterrestrial intelligence was extremely remote. Still, he admitted that the Soviets could not rule out the possibility of intelligent extraterrestrial life. Kovalyonok brought up the issue of UFO landings in the Soviet Union. He said that the Soviets had no official figures on UFO sightings, but that unofficial estimates ran as high as 1,000 annually. He also admitted that the Soviets had collected a great deal of data on UFOs, including photographs, films, radar tapes, and eyewitness testimony. Kovalyonok said that the Soviets had no intention of sharing their data with the United States. He went on to say that the Soviet Union had achieved full cooperation with the United States in science and technology, except in the field of aviation and space. He said that the Soviet Union did not trust the United States, and that the feeling was mutual. Kovalyonok said that the Soviet Union was willing to share data on space and aviation with any nation that was willing to cooperate on a reciprocal basis. The general concluded his remarks by saying that the Soviet Union had no intention of giving the United States any UFO data unless and until the United States was willing to reciprocate. He said that the Soviet Union was not afraid of the United States and that the feeling was mutual. In April of 1977, the British Ministry of Defense declassified and released a number of UFO reports. Among them was a report on the Rendlesham Forest incident, which occurred in December of 1980. An RAF sergeant saw strange lights in the forest and investigated. The lights moved erratically and then flew into the sky and disappeared. 2 days later, the sergeant went back to the forest with a friend, and they saw similar lights. Again, they moved erratically and then flew into the sky and disappeared. On December, the sergeant, along with several other witnesses, saw a bright white light over the forest. They drove to the area and found 20 circular discs scattered in a semicircle. The sergeant picked one up and handed it to an officer, but the officer ordered him to put it down. The next morning, the sergeant returned to the forest with a civilian friend. They found 2 more discs and several scorched patches of ground. The discs were made of a metal-like substance that was unlike anything the sergeant had ever seen before. It was slightly magnetic, but it was not iron or steel. It was too light to be lead or tungsten. It looked almost like aluminum, but it was not ductile. The sergeant took a piece home, and it disappeared. Several months later, the sergeant was called to a meeting with his superiors. They told him that what he had seen was a landing party from a UFO. They said that the object was extraterrestrial in origin, but they denied that any bodies or debris had been found. The sergeant was ordered not to discuss the incident with anyone. In 1978, the British Ministry of Defense conducted an investigation into the sergeant's claims. They found no evidence to support his story, but they also failed to disprove it. The ministry concluded that the incident was most likely a hoax, but they could not rule out the possibility that a UFO had landed in the forest. You now have enough information to form your own opinion. Believe what you want. But remember, there is a huge cover-up going on. You're only getting part of the story. I don't know if any of this is true or not. I can't prove it or disprove it. All I can do is present the information to you and let you draw your own conclusions. Now it's your turn. Tell me what you think. Write to the address provided. We may publish your letter in a future newsletter. Thank you for watching.